Welcome, everyone. So you've noticed we've switched our Zoom link to the CNCF. We're trying to move more of our infrastructure to be in the CNCF. We'll talk about that in a bit. For now, just a quick overview of our agenda. We're going to start with some introductions, what we just shipped, some demos, what we have planned, and some of the community news. Any Q&A, please stay and ask us at the end, and feel free to drop questions in the chat whenever you feel like. Quickly, meeting the team. Our team is constantly growing. This time, we'd like to welcome Siddhant. Siddhant is one of the community volunteers, maintainer. He's joined recently, and he's helping us on the CLI, on the Go SDK. So give him a warm welcome. We have so many opportunities to become maintainers, and we're actively looking for people to onboard. We want more people to actively be contributing to OpenFGA that are not just us. If the server is too hard, too complex, we have a lot of places where your skill set will be appreciated, and that are more don't need specialization, and those are like in the SDKs. We have several languages: Python, .NET, Java, Go, JS. If you know Ruby, Rust, or PHP, Carla, one of the team members, is working on Ruby, and Steve. Evan has a PHP, and hey, if we have more people join them, we can make those an official SDKs. Helm charts are the same. We're gonna keep talking about Helm charts, but Helm charts, it's not always the easiest for us to test, considering we don't have all the different options the way people deploy our Helm charts. So different people deploy them in different situations. So it's hard for us to merge things without making sure we're not breaking anyone. So that's why we need a lot of testers. We need a lot of maintainers who know their particular platform to help us work with new PRs, make sure that they work for them and don't break anything. Things like the CLI, the ID integrations, where our maintainers are always welcome. And again, depending on your expertise, there's always something that can be done. Of course, like there's things like docs that we also really appreciate. If anyone here wants to introduce themselves at the moment, I guess, Mohindi, that's you. If you'd like to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Okay. It's really nice that I've seen there are opportunities for maintainers as well. My name is Mohindi Asena. I am a Kenyan software engineer, currently working for a company called Savannah Informatics. We majorly deal with a lot of health tech, and I'm very much excited because I'm the one who's pioneering the implementation of OpenFGA in the company. So I've tried to contribute a bit on the repo, on the docs. I have a very small contribution on some typos that I found. And we've currently passed the POC stage. I did that last year, and I'm currently researching on how I'm going to add it on a few extra repos. So one of the major repo that has a lot of the OpenFGA work is a Golang repo. And I'm migrating some of the ideas and the knowledge and the learnings I had from that repository onto the other projects which are built on top of Django. So there are quite a number of questions that I might have, and I was really looking into what other products were doing regarding solving this problem, specifically building on top of frameworks and authorizing workflows on top of something like Django. And I'd be excited to have a discussion with you as well, and maybe some follow-up communications. Yes, we currently just passed POC stage. I think I've been able to answer a lot of the questions that you have for the interest. But I'm really excited. I'm a big open source fan as well.
Thank you for that. We're super also excited every time we get someone, especially when they start with fixing type, because you start with fixing some small typos in the docs, you end up contributing a fix to our algorithm. That's amazing. That's the journey. So welcome, and we're definitely we can talk about the end, answer some of your questions, especially around Django. Like we don't have right now support for like a framework for Python, but we do have for like Spring Boot, and there's a community contributor who has built something for on the .NET side, on the ASP.NET. So having something for Django follows within that same spirit, and we'd love to know more about what you're trying to do. Maybe it can become official if at some point. So thanks for joining. Just quickly an overview of what we shipped over the last month. We shipped a 1.8.9 of the server. Like two of the major things are thanks to community contributions. Again, we're gonna keep calling out community contributions because they're very appreciated. They may sound small, but everything like builds up. And again, starting small and building up your confidence is perfectly okay, and like again, always appreciate it. So on OpenFGA 1.8.9, we updated some of the logs for the health check service. We also extended object ID for varchar for MySQL to 255 characters. It was a bit lower before, which was blocking some people who were using MySQL adapter rather than the in memory or Postgres. So thanks for the contribution. We had a few fixes on the Go SDK. Actually, we pushed out Go SDK 0.7 and 0.7.1. Warning for those installing 0.6, the last one, it does have the breaking changes that we re-released in 0.7. So if don't upgrade without making sure everything's okay. The main changes is support for batch check, but we also and that's not just in the Go SDK, but starting with the Go SDK, we're rewriting or fixing how we're handling retries and error handling. So in the Go SDK, for example, we weren't retrying properly on all network errors. We were not actively retrying. So now you'll think like hopefully you'll see the difference once this is fixed. You're gonna encounter less errors as the SDK retries automatically. If you want to disable that, of course, there's options to disable, but by default, it retries up to 3 times. And we're bringing that same consistency to the rest of the SDKs. Many of them already retry, but don't retry on network errors. We're gonna standardize and make that whole flow consistent. On the Python SDK, we shipped 0.9.3 with some bug fixes in the OTel configuration, also some changes in our dependency pinnings, but expect the 0.9.4 soon. That comes with some community contributions. One of them is like passing in the name to filter, then like listing stores and filtering by name. There's a few other contributions, so expect that also soon. On the CLI front, that's gonna help you on when importing, if you have like any sort of rate limiting in your service or anything like that, and you'd like to ramp up, for example, your database as you import a lot of tuples, we added support for RPS ramp up for writes. And again, because it's using the Go SDK, a much better improved error handling and retry mechanism. That's it. We're gonna move to the even more exciting part of this session, which is an MCP, like an OpenFGA MCP demo by our very own Evan. So, Evan, I'm gonna give it to you.
Well, thank you. Hey, everyone. Yeah, for those new, my name's Evan. I'm on the FGA tooling team. Live up near Chicago, and I have a addiction to building cool little side projects. So I wanted to show you one that came out of a hackathon today. Model Context Protocol, MCP. This came out of a hackathon project from a few weeks ago. If you remember, I had the PHP SDK a few months ago before that. So like I said, I'm addicted to building these things. If you're not familiar with MCP, it's a fairly new, last few months, open standard introduced by Anthropic. Basically, it's a way of simplifying how AI can connect and interact with external tools. So you can think of it a little bit like how OpenAPI defines, APIs. This defines how AI can interact with tools in all sorts of really interesting ways. So it enables agentic AI tools like Claude Desktop, Raycast, Cursor, Windsurf, Warp. OpenAI announced they're going to be adding support for it into the ChatGPT desktop client. So these are all ways for these desktop level installable tools to interact with tools that are on your system or something in the cloud. But as far as I know, none of it runs from like their web front ends presently, but I'm sure that's coming. It's possible. It's just a little more complicated. But anyway, it's tremendously exciting what you can do with this, and the rate of adoption, particularly in the last few weeks, has just been accelerating tremendously. So yeah, all that said, what does this mean for OpenFGA? What does this enable? So there's really just like a wealth of really interesting integrations you can do when you add OpenFGA to AI systems. So I'll try to be cognizant of time, but being able to use natural language to directly manipulate and query your OpenFGA stores, working with models, creating, deleting stores, creating, deleting, tuples and updating models. It's conversational, of course, so it understands, like I said, natural language. So you can actually have a human-friendly conversation with an AI agent, and it will understand what's going on with your OpenFGA model. You can say, oh, I want to add support for this, and it can write those changes to your store. It'll generate the model for you and update them and write them and all that. Of course, lots of potential for debugging, and even some interesting stuff you could do for like conversationally integrating this with. Well, I'll give you an example. One idea this gave me is, I have a smart home, and every lock, every window, everything has a sensor and is configurable. I run all that through Home Assistant. So I was thinking, why couldn't I apply OpenFGA to home security? So I could literally say to, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, say, I've given my neighbor an NFC token. I can create a workflow in Home Assistant to check with OpenFGA, and if my neighbor uses that NFC token that I gave them to try to access the front door, if I've allowed that, unlock the front door. I could just say that conversationally. Okay, give my neighbor access to the front door. So it's really cool. Like, that's just a very personal example, but there is an enormous amount of stuff you could do. So MCP, it basically just acts like a universal bridge for OpenFGA and AI-driven tools. So let me give you a little demo here. Okay, let me pull up Windsurf here. So I wanted to show this off to you all in Claude today, but Claude is being problematic, so we'll have to use with Windsurf. And that absolutely has nothing to do with the fact that I was up till 4 a.m. tweaking this. And I have never committed bad code at 4 a.m. So yeah, it's definitely not on me. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah, so MCP servers and pretty much any host, which is what you would consider a desktop tool like this. There's a blur between host and client, but they all basically have a configuration interface. And right now the standard is kind of this annoying JSON, but it's early days. I'm sure there will be cleaner tools for this soon. But I have just pointed this to the OpenFGA MCP server that I have installed locally here. I have it pointing to just a OpenFGA instance running in Docker on my machine. And there's a few different ways for MCP to communicate, and this is just the most well-supported one. There's a few different ones you can play with, and there's some really cool tooling. This is like a web inspector that you can really dive in and see what communications are happening for debugging things. It's really handy. But so I've configured Windsurf with this, and you can see it here. There's one available MCP server. So it's connected to this. So if I click this, you'll see it understands all the endpoints that I have programmed in here already, which is, just our basics here. We have check, list objects, list users, list stores, create store, delete store, right authorization model, the basics. And a few helper methods, get store ID by name. Since you're conversationally speaking to this, you'll naturally want to say the store's names rather than give IDs. So this is just like a resolver to help it do lookups for resolving name to ID for stores. The MCP server knows nothing about really the host. And it doesn't have any sort of AI dependencies itself. It's all handled by the host. So for Windsurf here, I'm going to set this up with Claude Sonnet 3.7. Had fairly good luck with that one. And let's see what breaks. So let's start with just asking, what FGA stores do I have available? So you can see it queried the MCP tool, our OpenFGA MCP server, and it found that I have one store available. So let's do something silly like let's create 3 stores with random names. All right, so this is just using the endpoint that the tool exposes, which is create store, and doesn't really have any sort of pre-engineered prompts or anything. It just knows how to do that, right? It just knows, hey, the user wants to create a store. It wants me to use a silly name, and so I'll create it. Okay, so created 3 random stores there. Let's create something named MCP Demo. Okay, so we got that created, and let's see. Let's generate a new authorization model for MCP Demo. I'd like it to demonstrate a simple file system with users and user groups. It should express who owns a document or folder, who can read a document or see a folder, and whether they can edit it. Afterward, briefly explain the model to me and how it works. I was trying to get speech to text working before this. I thought that'd be cooler. It'd be like, hey, Jarvis. Yeah, Tyler.
So question, would it remember the latest context of the store that you just created so where you didn't have to actually specify MCP demo, or do you need to specify that?
No, in my testing so far, it has remembered that. So I'll show you an example of that actually. Yeah, I don't need to really specify MCP demo, but for the sake of nothing going wrong and going up in flames.
Doesn't hurt to clarify, but yeah, I was just wondering.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, the neat thing about MCP is it's completely stateless. So all of the state lives on the AI agent, on the host. So it keeps track of all that. And, like if you're working on a authorization model like the one it just generated here, just created one, saved it, we have an ID. It will keep that in its own memory. So we don't have to have like a state somewhere that it's maintaining, right? So for example, like let's add support to our new authorization model to enable sharing with other users. This will be assigned to either a user or a user group and determine if a particular file or folder can be shared with others. So this will know what our last authorization model was. Okay, well, actually I have to query it there. So yeah. Yeah. All right. So it's getting the authorization model. It's generating an updated authorization model with that share relation. And now it's going to explain the changes it made. It wrote the changes. And of course, depending on how you write your prompt, you could say, check with me before you write this to the store or things like that. You'd want to be a little more careful with a real, production server, but this is all just for fun. Yeah, so it added, a share relation, updated the model, saved that, and we're good to go. So let's generate some mock data to play with. Let's have 3 users, Anne, Bob, and Charlie. Let's make Anne the owner of a document named report 1. Bob and Charlie can both read it. All right. So it's writing relationship tuples. So Anne is the owner of a document, it added that. Bob is the viewer of a document, it added that. And Charlie is the viewer of a document. Yep. So there it goes. So then you can do just conversational stuff like, can Anne view the document report 1? Oh yeah, the model doesn't, yeah. She's the owner, but not the viewer in the authorization model it wrote. So it didn't have a fallback to that, but yeah. And now it's going to go off the rails for me, of course. But here we go. It should resolve itself. So it updated the authorization model. And there it goes. Okay. So it ensured that Anne had the viewer relationship. That really should have updated the model so that the viewer could also be the owner, but is what it is. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much the basics there. It's early days. Like I said, this is just the result of a couple weeks of hacking, and most of it really over 3 days this past week for the hackathon. And yeah, it unlocks a lot of really interesting potential for tools to work together. If you are interested in playing with it, it's right now it's available on my personal GitHub repo. We'll see what traction it gets. Maybe we'll make this an official thing at some point, but yeah, you can find it here on GitHub. I'll drop the link in Zoom. The contributions are super welcome. There's a lot to do, and yeah, I would appreciate the help and enthusiasm. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, let me know.
We have one question from Alan. He's asking if it can generate the DSL version instead of the JSON version of the model.
That is something I'm still trying to figure out how to make it do that, how I inform it to do that. Like I said, nothing is like hard coded. It's all inferred from these MCP sort of APIs. It's almost like comments in code. It just pulls from the files. One idea I had was to offer rules, which are basically just markdown files in plain English that explain how you want it to work, what kind of output you want it to do. You could have a link in there to the DSL specification, examples of models using DSL. I agree. The not having the big JSON payloads all the time would be great, but that is very high on my list to figure out. So we'll see if we can get there. Yeah.
Evan, I've been playing around with like Chat GPT. What are they called?
plugins?
Yeah, plugins. There we go. Sorry. And
Yeah.
that would do that model translation. That would be able to kind of like, you can teach it how OpenFGA models things, and then it would be able to kind of know the concepts and such, and then do kind of what Mahandi was saying as far as like being able to generate test for that. So it'd be able to generate a whole model plus tuples plus test like FGA.yaml file. So
Mhm.
we can chat. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The other
absolutely.
question
That's
is,
super cool.
so we don't have in the server a way to get the DSL format, right? And that's why there's no API in the server itself. But we have other ways of doing that. So we have the language report where we can take a JSON and convert it to, or the CLI can do that, right? So is it possible to integrate other tools in the MCP server, for example, the CLI, and use that for things that are not in the server itself? For example, if you say, I want to run this test, right? Yeah, the CLI can do it. So maybe you can direct certain actions to the CLI and certain actions to the server, for example. Would that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That was totally possible. Yeah. And actually probably having a plugin or a sort of a language server, MCP server for
Yep.
putting all the terms together would make a lot of sense for extensibility.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Because you need to, I'm thinking again, if you need to talk to a server there, maybe you need to have like the CLI run as a server that can expose certain things, like for example, run these tests or convert DSL to JSON, JSON to DSL, or
Yeah,
that can make sense.
absolutely. Yeah.
Cool, it's awesome. And the other question is if you wanted, so who is generating the model? That is the AI of the IDE, right? The one that is generating. Okay, and how is doing that? So, how are you helping the AI of the IDE in this case, WebServe? So you have like some, I don't know, rules or files that help them to do that, prompts.
Yeah. Yeah. So the wild thing about the demo I just gave is apparently Claude Sonnet has a lot of information about OpenFGA modeling just baked into its training,
Okay.
because I gave it absolutely no training whatsoever
Okay.
on that. It just winged it, and it worked,
Okay.
more or less. But if you wanted,
Yep.
very accurate results, yeah, like I was saying,
Mhm.
we should probably create some well-refined and reusable
Mhm.
windsurf cursor, whatever
Mhm.
rules that people can just plug in there, and
Mhm.
yeah, that would be pretty simple to do. Hey, Daniel.
Awesome.
Hey, Evan, yeah, this is pretty cool. So one thing that I've tried is like, just like as a newbie, just straight up just asking ChatGPT things, no context to it, and then it would generate things. And so I noticed that when it was a simple one, yes, it looked correct. Even I could notice that everything was correct. I could recognize things were correct. Then I tried to put in the much more complicated things, which came out of like CNCF channel, people asking questions, and then it generated things that I could tell were not correct, right? And it thought it was correct, and so I was trying to refine it to get it to be correct. But I guess how can we, because Claude had, like, you had given it no context, like how do we know that something, because we know that the AI, what's it, the AI's bots, they lie, right? Because if you press them like 2-3 times, they will tell you, oh no, sorry, and then it'll give you another answer, and it's because that the response was incorrect, and they just grab things from what they learn. So how do we, when the response is provided, how do we verify that what its response is correct, because it's quite sure when it responds, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting the way you can influence these tools. It goes back to what Andreas and I were talking about, was really just building rules into which to keep the AI on sort of, guide rails. You can literally tell it, it's bizarre, but you can literally tell it things like, think really hard about this, and it will spend more time checking itself and figuring this stuff out. there, there are instances, particularly where conversations go on for a long time, it will start hallucinating more. It will start, creating erroneous responses. And that can be a little trickier in AI agents that keep memory, like ChatGPT does now. Perplexity. I think Windsurf actually just recently added support for that too, per project memory, which is interesting. So yeah, you do have to be careful of that. Rules would go a long way to helping with that. I would also, if this gets to a polished state and people want to start using in production, we'll need to have like a production rule set where, before you make any changes, confirm, make a plan and confirm that plan with me before you make any changes. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that
sorry.
for production scenarios, you probably don't want to change anything, right? It's more a querying tool. And but for prototyping and learning makes sense. Something that you see that the tool did is, so Evan's asking, can I view this document, right? And they realized they couldn't, and it failed. So it fixed itself, right? So these things, if you have a way for them to test, this thing I did is right or wrong, right? For example, if they try to write a model and the model fails, they're going to say, okay, I made a mistake, right? And they're going to try again. So that flow works, right? So it's just that they realize they made a mistake because they didn't work what they tried. And so that help that learning process to them, right? Anyway, so very interesting. I think there's a lot of things we can do here. It's of course a very exciting area, and we need to find just the time to also do this, right? And I think it can be very powerful. And also I think it shows that this idea of doing the integrations in MCPs and in the IDEs is probably a good path to take, instead of just trying to integrate, I don't know, in our IDEs or things like that, right? Because it seems more powerful, because you can actually do a lot of things more if you're in the IDE.
Yeah.
Anyway, cool.
Absolutely. Thanks.
So we don't have a lot of time, but I will try to go quickly to what I wanted to show here. So we just merged in the OpenFGA. So we've been working the last few weeks in adding more content about best practices when using OpenFGA and or adoption patterns and things like that. In the last meeting, we talked about this document that is called adoption patterns, and we had a good conversation. Actually, a lot of the people in the call that day, they mentioned they follow some of these things. For the ones that are new to the project or new to this call, I recommend you to check those documents because they're pretty useful. And the one I wanted to share this time was this one, which is a way that we've seen people in modeling that usually ends up in having worse performance and models that are more difficult to understand. And actually in our last meeting, someone mentioned that they tried the approach of WRB, not recommending today, and they actually changed their mind because it didn't work for them. And it basically is this deciding how generic or how dynamic you want your model to be, or how abstract or concrete, for example, right? And the way we're gonna discuss it here is, so it's very tempting when you start using OpenFGA to say, let's build a model that can represent anything. And this is the way you usually build this when you're building your own authorization system from scratch, right? So if I need myself to build a system to implement authorization that is generic enough, I might build a table that is called resources, a table that is called entities, a table that is called roles and users in my database, and try to use those tables to generically implement and define authorization, right? This model here is something like that, right? So you have a role that is generic, can be any role. An entity can be anything, an organization, a parent organization, a part of a holding. So all of those can be different entities. This can be hierarchical, so you can have any hierarchy. In roles, we assign to members of a role. And then you have resource, which is pretty generic. You can put any resource there. a document, a folder, a project, whatever you want, belongs to an entity. It can have a hierarchy in resources. You can have folders and documents, right? You can do all of these things. However, if you read this this model, it's hard to understand what is it about, what is the actual authorization logic you're embedding here. And there's a lot of that logic that is embedded in the tuple. So the resource needs to be called document and the resource type ID document 1 or ID project 1, right? So we'll end up using in the ID of the resources the resource type and metadata about the resource, data about the resource, right? So it's not great from the point of view how you understand the model, how it works. And in general, the way we recommend you is that if the end user of the application can define certain entities and relations, then those should be represented in tuples. For example, if you need the user to create their own roles, then you should have a role type. If not, you should not. We have an example here that says you have a user, an organization with 2 roles, billing, admin, and billing manager. Most of the SaaS applications have these 2 roles. And we recommend you to define them as relations in the model and not to use this construction to define every role, okay? And another example, so these are the reasons to try to create models that are more linked to your business logic and resemble more your business logic. They are easy to maintain to understand. They have better performance. So FGA ends up traversing, for example, all the resources with these conditions. And if you have more resources or less resources, that changes. And it helps having more concrete types, helps OpenFGA do more efficient queries and evaluations. You can change the model very easily. If you want to add a new role here, it's just adding a line, doesn't impact any other change, right? So you have a lot of flexibility in the model. You should use that instead of trying to have a very generic solution. And then if you have a very large organization, we have many resource types, you can define them in modules. And we have ways that you can decide this application can only write tuples for these resource types. For example, the document management application is the only one who can write tuples to the document type, right? You cannot do those kind of permissions if you have a model where those entities are not represented as types here. So there's a lot of reasons to take this path. But there are some applications, for example, you want end users to define their own roles, and this is the way you model them in FGA. And this is fine, and you can combine both, that you have static roles and then dynamic roles. You can combine them, so you can manage billing if you are a member of a role that the user directly has created and assigned to this permission, or if you're admin or a billing manager. But you will only go this route if you need the user to create their own permission, their own roles. If not, you just can't keep using static roles. And so we have an example to do that. Another example is you have organizational hierarchies. That is very common too. And this one is every organization can be hierarchical. But then there are 2 use cases you usually have. One is that there's usually a type where you want to represent the employees of your customers, of your own company, sorry, and those can have specific permissions. So you have a super admin role that has admin permissions in every organization, for example. And instead of defining that as a generic hierarchy, you can define a concrete hierarchy, which is have a type that can call system or company or platform that has the employees of my company, and then the ones that are assigned to this role can actually be performed as admins in the child organization, in every organization, right? Actually, I'm missing here a relationship to the system thing that I need to add. And if so, you could do that that way. Anyway, so those are some ideas. We're gonna keep adding more recommendations here on how to model things. I don't know if in Alan or Muhindini, you have any questions about these things I mentioned today, but let me know if you have. And or if you have any other questions about best practices for modeling, also let us know here or in the channel, and we can evolve our documentation here.
Having models that have very concrete definitions, as you said, and having data-driven permission checks, something about grouping all the permissions into a specific role and then assigning everything downstream. I've been doing that, and it's very difficult to actually see where the permission comes from, as you've said, it's very true, but it reduces the length of the entire model that you come up with. So I want you to touch on that a bit, then
Yeah,
probably
please
ask another
share
question.
that. Yeah, awesome. You can share that if you want, like what you're building in the CNC Slack, where we usually are there to try to help mostly on modeling questions, right? And if we can review what you did and see how we can help you too. Maybe it's the right thing for the use case, right? Or maybe it can be simplified. There are scenarios where generic scenarios like models like this make sense. In general, are where if you have a scenario where you need to build kind of something for third-party applications to actually define permissions, you don't know the types of those third-party applications, so you might need to give them a resource type, right? But for first-party applications, that the ones that are in your company, yeah, you should try to build models that are as complete as possible.
Okay.
But
So
we've seen this
another
pattern
very,
of the go ahead, sorry.
Another very interesting thing I saw that was permissions are modeled from, how do I put this? Permissions are modeled from, after modeling permissions, you check permissions on 3 different levels. So the 3 different levels are probably the API layer, then the model layer where you're trying to query data and restrict access to certain subset of the data. And then the other layer is the business logic layer. So probably I can give an example, something like if you're building an accounting system on a very simple scale, we'd talk about if it's a double entry accounting system, when someone makes an API call to one specific endpoint, it might affect more than one, let me say, table in a database. So you're writing permissions to both table one. You're writing permissions from table one. Let's say you're writing an invoice and you're also writing a sale, something like that. It becomes very difficult and becomes very cumbersome to dump all those aggregated tuples from different types as you go along. That's something I noted, and I really wanted to see what other people are also doing regarding the same. Specifically because if I model the permission checks around APIs, I might miss on a lot of the business logic which cuts across multiple APIs, and I might also miss on some of the things that are should be represented in terms of like the data layer. So I don't want people to have access to the entire table, the entire rows of data in a certain table. So I put checks for that. But then while modeling, it becomes very difficult to have, on one end, I'm focusing on the API layer where I'm just checking if it's a GET request, then it's a read. If it's a GET, it's a put, it's probably an update. Post, and so on. So when that is very easy to model, and it's also very easy to model something around what someone can access and also check that in turn. But when you combine the two and also include the business logic, which is mostly some small custom things that people do to change the data, it becomes a bit complex. And I want to see what patterns people are doing also in the same. I hope I've been a bit clear specifically in the question.
I would recommend you to also go to this channel. What we're understanding is that in general, the way we see people using FGA is that, yeah, you want to know, can I create an invoice, right? And then you're going to ask in the API that creates an invoice if you can create an invoice. That might imply changing multiple database tables, but the permission you care about is, can I create an invoice? Right? Not if can I change the sales table? Yeah, that's part of creating an invoice. If the user has permission to create an invoice, they have permissions to do a lot of operations in your database. You need to check for all of those, right? Because the action that the user is performing is creating the invoice. I don't know if I got it right? But we can iterate on that and learn more about the use case and try to help you there too.
For sure. I think the last question I might have is around permission checks for the front end, and it is not more of a security concern on the front end, it's more of a UI UX problem. Because you don't want to show someone a button that they cannot perform an action with. So it's generally not mentioned around within the forums that I've really looked into. I'll join the Slack channel, probably I can get more insight there as well.
Yeah, but okay, so they're in the same operations that you would do to know if the user can. So you have, let's say you want to have a button that says create invoice, right? And you want to know, can the user have user permissions to create an invoice?
Yeah.
That's a permission that whenever you render the page for that we have that button, you will need to, in the server, call can check for can create invoice and return the value to the client somehow, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not that you only call FGA in the API to protect the action. You call it when you're rendering your web pages to return what the user can do. So if you have a single page application and those permissions are returned by an endpoint, you're going to return them. In that endpoint, you're going to call the different checks, right, to find out what they can do. There's an endpoint called batch check that you can use to call multiple checks at the same time. That when you're doing those kind of things might be useful because you might be several actions that you want to protect for. And then the other one is some of the things, if you're building a single page application, you can cache a lot of that data because usually when the application loads, there's some permissions that are kind of static, right? And don't change often. So you can call it once and check it. The guys from Docker that they came often to these meetings, they are not here today. They have that problem, right? And they solve with a lot of caching on the client side and calling batch check to get off those permissions from the UI.
So I want to challenge a bit of the understanding, because if I have like 15 different components and all have each individually need a specific permission check, it would be really heavy on the front end. So what I was really modeling with was I send a list of permissions that are already verified. So I was really struggling to find a way to send back all the relations that all the relations that a certain type has, because that can be used based on how I've modeled my the authorization policy, is that the relations are the permissions that someone can use. So if I can send back all the relations someone has to a specific object, it would be really easy for me to just give them that whole list and then we just render dynamically after. Can be some response on login.
And
So
you can do that.
Go ahead, Raj.
So you can do that right now.
You can.
You can.
So there's a list relations endpoint in the SDKs that you can send them a list of relations, and it's going to tell you, going to check for all of them, right? So,
but ultimately,
that is what I was.
Ultimately, it's just a batch check. You're checking. You have a list of relations. You want to see if someone has access to those. So the SDKs have a list relation, but even if you're not using the SDK, you're just calling a bunch of relations with the user as a batch, right? It's just a batch.
Yeah. So the only difference there is you mentioned I want to know all the relations, right? And the endpoints we have is you need to specify the list of relations. But the list doesn't change very often, right? It's pretty static. And it's not that you want all the relations. You usually want the ones that are more permissions. So we think it makes sense to do it that way. If you want to really get all the relations for whatever reason, the only way you have to do that today is you can get the model ones, find the relations in the model, and send them all, right? So that is possible. It's not difficult, and you're just going to get the JSON and find the relations there. But you will end up making more check calls than what you need. Right?
Yeah, I would heavily recommend against that. That's why we don't allow this in the SDKs, because you need to know what relations you have. So when you're listing permissions, you don't care about what the parent is. And you should not be making more calls than what you absolutely need. Your app needs to know what permissions it is. It needs to render the UI. And if you're adding new permissions, yes, you will need a new deployment. But that's of course, because it's a new permission. You don't want to get a permission that you don't know about. So absolutely, you can do it. Andres is saying is get all the permissions from the model. But I would strongly suggest the permissions you need, hard code them, like it's not hard coding. It's like those are the permissions you need. Those are permissions that your UI knows about. List them exactly those, and either call the SDK like list relations with that, or call batch check with that. But only do those, and don't just do a general like get me everything. It's gonna slow down your app because more latency. You're gonna do more requests. It's gonna cause, if you're using OpenFGA the server, you're causing undue like load on the server for no reason. So I would strongly suggest against doing that, unless like it's just for testing. You just want to play around.
Okay. Last question about change management. How do you guys do? Because every time a policy changes, there probably will be a deploy for both the backend and front end, because I need to pass in the new changes that exist. Has there been anyone who has the same problem? Because I need to update FGA, then go with the same ends, update my GitLab, then proceed on to
So are you saying like
make
if you want
releases.
to update your model?
Yeah, if I want to add probably a new policy, something, or we'd want to restrict or add. Maybe I'm accommodating something, a new extra feature, and I want to add it also onto the model.
Yeah.
How would the change management look like when I'm having more than one repo? Yeah.
So if you're using a config management system that you're listening to, that's like you would update it in there, and that everything would reload from the config management system. If you're not, it has to go out in the same deployment where you like update your authorization model. There's a few things you can do. First of all, updating the authorization model is, so long as you're pinning on your production apps, does not do anything. So you can safely update your authorization model first, test it, validate it without affecting any of your production apps. If you're pinning and you should be like sending your authorization model ID and your writes and checks and all that. So once you've tested and validated your authorization model with the new features, that's when you need to start making sure your apps are targeting this model. You would do that. You would update the model before rolling out the changes in your app, before like rolling out like what the feature is, until all the apps are targeting that model. The model, of course, must be backward compatible, so it shouldn't break suddenly because you updated it. So so that your old app without the new features and now targeting the latest model, but it's still writing, reading correctly, everything's good. That's when you can merge in whatever changes you want to change how you're writing things. Now you want to write more things, less things, all that stuff. So always approach model changes and try to think about backward compatibility. If you want to do drastic changes, you have to split them across in steps that are backward compatible. So do incremental changes while preserving backward compatibility, wait for everything has updated, and then slowly roll out.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thanks for
Okay, great.
for my
So
questions.
please, yeah, set for the questions. Please reach out in the channel if you want more clarification. We can keep discussing things there. And thank you everyone for attending. Thanks Evan for the awesome demo, and we'll see you next month.